What the fuck? I didn't think that I killed the cam in the scene. I gotta turn my volume up a bit more. 177, we want 200% me. We're gonna bring computer volume down to 75% so I can blast the audio in my ears but not into your ears and drown myself out, because that seems to be what was happening there yesterday uh, when I was reviewing that. Let's do this. Also, when I was initially uploading this, this was cut off, but then it wasn't after. So I don't know if my phone's fucked or this is fucked. Sorry if I just got 23% louder. Maybe need to adjust your levels now, but now if we watch Steam fucking trailers, this is my normal scene. Okay, talking stuff. Here we go, back into talking stuff. It just turns into a black screen. I forgot. Yes, we only have my mouth, my audio, right? The window share group 2 should have a cam. Oh my fucking god. I see. That's the one. Right. What fucking group 2s? Oh my whole camera setup. I gotta rename that. Camera setup. There we go. Get there. Get there. My cat's here. Come here. Come here. Don't touch that, but come up here. We're about to get in it. We're about to watch some fucking politics. Windows snare. This would be above what we're. I don't know this format. I don't know if this is a good format. Right here, right? You put it right here. Right here, so you just see my mouth when I'm talking. Hi. Can you look me in the eyes when you're talking to me? Thank you. Thank you. Can you look me in the eyes when you're talking to me? Right here. Right here. You should look me right in the eyes when you're talking to me, okay? You're gonna be looking at me right here. Okay? Thank you. Where are we down here? You're like right here? Okay. Oh, very interesting. Oh yeah. Oh, very interesting. Let's do this. Oh, very interesting. Very interesting. Politics. Wow, politics has gotten real interesting lately. I'm gonna put it right here so I can react to how fucking fucked up. What's that, Canadian politics? You're totally fucking cooked? We're totally fucked? Oh, fuck me. We're totally fucking cooked? Wow, guys. Hit the like and subscribe if you think we're totally cooked. Shit. Type shit. Type shit, guys. Holy fuck, type shit. This is Info Canada. Can I get this guy's shit in here? Okay. Right here. Canada Info Canada. You know, sometimes my brain gets a little funny. It's a little fuzzy. Here we go. Let's fucking watch this. I was in the game. I'm fucking so tired of it. I'm so sick of taking my cuckoo's nest medicine.
Thank you, Mr. Ledwick. It's very refreshing to hear you talk about, two sides to a coin, so that's wonderful. Now, I wonder, I want to start by taking us back for a moment. So when I sat on the Finance Committee, we studied the fallout from the Panama Papers, one of the largest financial leaks in history. And what did we hear at that time? We heard that billions of dollars were being routed through shell companies, hidden in offshore jurisdictions, shielded from transparency, and in many cases beyond the reach of enforcement. We heard plain as day that Canada really had a problem, and not a small one, a structural one. So the agency at the center of that fight is FinTrack. This is the body responsible for tracking suspicious financial transactions, identifying money laundering, and passing intelligence to law enforcement. It's literally the follow the money agency. So here's my problem. At the very moment when financial crime is becoming more sophisticated, when we're dealing with fentanyl trafficking, organized crime, sanctions evasions, international capital flows, we're now talking about cuts to FinTrack. Cuts. So I just want to connect it to something a little bit more recent. So we've seen repeated concerns about Canadian money, pension money, investment capital flowing through offshore jurisdictions like Bermuda or the Cayman Islands. And we know that Brookfield, who our Prime Minister is linked to, has investment structures involving offshore jurisdictions. To be clear, offshore structures are not automatically illegal, but that's exactly the point. That's what we learned from the Panama Papers. The issue isn't always illegality, it's lack of transparency. Now, it's the ability to move money through complex structures where ownership is obscured, tax obligations are minimized, and accountability becomes optional. And that's precisely the space that FinTrack is supposed to monitor. So let me ask the obvious question. How can we possibly claim to be serious about financial transparency when we're making cuts to the very agency tasked with detecting suspicious financial flows? When it comes to the actual enforcement,
it's almost like we need a guy in Parliament going, transparency, transparency. Oh, wait, we do have a guy doing that. His name is Pierre Poilievre, and he's been going like this for the last 15 years. Transparency, transparency. I'm a fucking farm boy. Transparency, transparency, transparency. And you know what we get? Fuck all. We get burnt documents. We get SNC Lavalin. We get weed scandal. We get Trudeau paying his mom $250,000 to fucking go give a high school speech. Guys like fucking Coachella at 54 doing shit that people like me should be peeking out at. I'm pretty sick. These should be my twilight years of fucking partying. And guess what? I'm just in gulag mode. I'm okay with that. I'm already in gulag mode. It feels like I'm in a gulag. I felt like I was in a gulag my whole life. Just grind away. Just grind the 9 to 5. Try your best. Do everything right. If the company don't hire you or hire someone else, okay. Just grind the rest of your life away at a shit job that pays you fuck all. That's beside the point. FinTrack was put in place to prevent money laundering, and it's trying to gain transparency in the whole fucked up system, which is why you pay so much for your groceries and you can't start a small business with a $20,000 loan or $10,000 loan like you used to. Now you need probably $100,000, and that's just to start up. So it's like covers like 25 to 50% of your entire, expenditures and overhead. You know what I mean? Technically, I mean, in a perfect world, you could set something up pretty sick. Depending on, you're gonna set up a hot dog stand, you have no overhead. It'll cover all your shit. I'm fucking feeling 69 in the house right now, bro. 69. Anyway, let's continue this. This is interesting stuff. It's nice that we're finally seeing some of this in Parliament, but you're gonna see a pushback on this, and it's very indicative of everything going on in Parliament right now. The guy's gonna use words like, "I feel very vulnerable," a lot of passing the buck. That's the other side does. "I feel very vulnerable. I feel attacked right now. You're misinterpreting. You will not allow me to finish my answer. That's 1,000 light years. It's not clear. It's not never a clear and concise answer. It's an answer that's going to take more time. It's always a filibustering answer. Okay. The other thing is that their answer always is preceded by, "Listen, we're not really in charge of this. Listen, we're here. We've been called here to answer questions in regards to this subject, but we're actually not really in charge or involved. We're going to wash our hands of this. I know we're here to answer questions specifically around this subject, but what's going to happen is, I just got to let you know that we don't really fucking know fuck all. We're going to wash our hands of this whole committee hearing. Go ahead and ask me. Go ahead and answer this." That's what you're going to hear.
Enforcement capacity, we're pulling back. It's seems to me it's like installing a state-of-the-art alarm system and firing the security guard. So here's my question to the officials. If FinTrack is expected to do more, track more transactions, enforce higher penalties, monitor increasingly complex financial flows, how can it do it with fewer resources?
Yes, and thank you for the question. And to be honest, I feel vulnerable here saying really anything about FinTrack without FinTrack actually at the table, speaking to how they would have affected their proposed reductions. But I would agree with the premise of your question in terms of FinTrack's accountability and intelligence and supervision, in particular around AML, like anti-money laundering, anti-terrorist financing, and its general surveillance around just suspicious transactions, whether they be in offshore tax havens or moving money in and out of money services businesses. I mean, the list goes on. They're not at the table, so I can't speak on where they would have sourced their savings proposals. I mean, all I can say is I would hope that an organization like FinTrack, and I'm not speaking necessarily about FinTrack, would have not reduced its resourcing from areas of that enormous priority that you outlined.
I know at the time when we were doing the study on FinTrack, they were very clear they are already under-resourced. So to me, this makes absolutely no sense that they're going to even have less resources. So I'm concerned about what message it sends to those that are trying to hide their money. I mean, move money, launder money through our system, like we're saying. We were under-resourced already. You can look it up on Master. And now we're taking even further funds away.
I share your concern, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I mean, our expectation of FinTrack and the other organizations is where they could have found, their savings and potential administrative efficiencies. And I know that sounds very generic, but in an organization like FinTrack, where they receive tens and hundreds of thousands of suspicious transaction reports, I mean, that's their bread and butter. How many people, are there systems, are there efficiencies, are there thresholds, are there ways that you could be working with financial institutions in order to economize that effort? I mean, the spirit of, I think, what was trying to, the spirit of this exercise, but I don't want to dilute your point in terms of the message that you're sending and the importance of FinTrack's work.
So I come from Vancouver, close to Vancouver. I'm about an hour out. And if there's one thing that we've learned, it's the money laundering through housing, through the opioids, through the casinos. Honestly, it blows my mind from the location where I come from, the damage that has been done in that area, and that now we're going to have less oversight because we're going to have less money going to FinTrack, which was, like I say, and I think it was 5 years ago, was already under-resourced. It doesn't make sense to me. We can see that our Canadian, just the fabric of our society is being hurt by this. FinTrack is getting less money.
Yeah, I would completely agree. And Chairman, Mr. McGauley has often cautioned me about the separation between government and officials looking at these committees. So what I'll say is, it's not a plug for the government or the minister, but the minister absolutely sees with what you just said. I mean, he made an appearance in Surrey. He had a very perspective on this follow the money strategy. He was in Surrey a few weeks ago. He was in Brantford. He's completely seized with the point that you're making, and he's deployed FinTrack in that context.
To me, that makes no sense. 5 years ago, they were already under-resourced. So that's the last of my statements. Is just there's less money and there's more trouble. So I don't see this working.
And all I can say is maybe I can go to this committee 6 months now and with FinTrack and talk about the progress in the area that you're talking about specifically and the resourcing associated with that. Just my commitment to you and the committee.
Hopefully it'll be FinTrack and you, not FinTrack and Mythos instead.
Thank you very much, Chair, and welcome here. I guess congratulations on this new role as Deputy Minister, if you've been here for a couple of months. I want to circle back to the line of questioning by my colleague, Mr. Hillan, regarding the cost of our national debt, noting that under Justin Trudeau, it doubled, and that the current Prime Minister plans to spend even more than the previous government had projected they were going to spend, which I believe results in yet higher deficits and higher costs for Canadians. After all, today's deficits are tomorrow's taxes. And so I guess my question for you, Mr. Reswick, is in your role as the Deputy Minister, what lessons have you or are you learning from the Comprehensive Expenditure Review that can be applied to future spending and future reviews? And are you developing a plan to reduce the deficit, if not in the short term, in the medium or long term?
And thank you for the question. I mean, to be quite honest, the comprehensive expenditure review. I mean, it was a substantive exercise. Like when you position it against other expenditure review processes, whether that's the reduction action plan of under Prime Minister Harper, or the program review era, even in the late '90s. I mean, this was a substantive exercise. I mean, as a bit of a fiscal framework junkie, it is a demonstration that these types of reallocations can happen in government, not without consequence. I mean, programs are eliminated, stakeholders, employees associated with those programs are affected 100%. But I think it does demonstrate that, and I'm speaking from like a small g government perspective, that we can, departments, bureaucracy can reallocate. And there's not this complete political abyss that doesn't allow us to do so. So that is one lesson learned, at least from my perspective. With respect to your second question, lesson affected 100%. But I think it does demonstrate that, and I'm just speaking from like a small g government perspective, that we can, departments, bureaucracy can reallocate. And there's not this complete political abyss that doesn't allow us to do so. So that is one lesson learned, at least from my perspective. With respect to your second question, I mean, the best I can say is that, we provide the government with options, and this government's been, pretty clear that it wants to keep the deficit to GDP ratio on a downward trajectory. The deficits are sustainable in relation to our economy, and so we're conscious of that. And so, any spending proposals or tax related proposals that we bring forward are within the context of that fiscal guardrail that is set out for itself.
The fiscal guardrail is sustainable.
Thank you for that. Having been a member of Parliament for almost 18 years and serving on this committee now for the third time, I would suggest that obviously our budgeting cycle allows for the reallocation of funds within a department on a regular basis. If you look at supplementary estimates and the processes that we have there. So I'm going to go back to the purpose of the comprehensive expenditure review. If it was simply just about the ability to reallocate money, I think that was already there. But my question would be, how often does the Department of Finance plan to undertake similar spending reviews in the future? Is this going to become a regular practice for the government? And to what end, if not to start to address the deficit and the debt load that Canadians are carrying?
I mean, with respect to your first observation, I mean, I do have to say, I feel like other deputies that you have at this table should provide their own testimonial, but I do feel like the departments feel like they're in a bit of a straitjacket, notwithstanding that they would have they would have legal flexibility within their vote structure in order to reallocate across programs. I think once governments make announcements and they establish, those allocations against particular grants and contributions programs, they feel very hamstrung to make, or very constrained to make any reallocations between those programs, even though they exist within a single vote, as determined by parliamentarians. So I think they only make these reallocations, if I'm just being honest, is under the cover of a government-wide exercise. And so I think these types of exercises give departments the opportunity to put forward reallocation proposals. At least that's just my perspective. In terms of your second question, well, deputies, and I'm a deputy of my own department, have had certain license to make reallocations. I think without the cover of a government effort, like that you would see launched in the budget or an update, I think it's very difficult to do such. And so I don't know that you'll see another one of these types of expenditure review proposals set in motion until the government of the day, and that's right now under my minister and the prime minister would set that in motion. So there's nothing that we're working on right now.
Transparent.
Thank you.
Minus the fact that most of it can't be disclosed because it's private, but it's transparent in the sense that we tell you that the majority of the information can't be disclosed because it's private, so you know what's going on.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. It's a great honor, as always, to rise on behalf of the people of Elgin, St. Thomas, and London. This is an incredibly important issue, and it's one that as lawmakers we cannot afford to get wrong. On one hand, we are talking about ensuring that those enforcing the laws that we set out in this place.
Okay, this is building a surveillance state. Let me see. Is this actually? I like to stay in the now. Oh damn! Is this the fucking one that just came out? Surveillance state. How far back we going? Surveillance. Oh fuck! Surveillance. We're going 23 hours. Yeah, we could start there. Late. We'll go back there. Let's see the latest one that just came out. Fucking 17. While we were watching the last one.
Thank you, Chair. The Superintendent, we had testimony in the last week that credit is growing, that indebtedness is increasing, and that people are dealing with their higher debt service costs by depleting their savings, refinancing existing debts, in other words, stretching the problem over a longer period of time, compounding it in the long term, and also cutting back on consumption, including necessities. We have just seen the jobs report with a loss of 108,000 full-time jobs in the last month for which we have data. Are you concerned that as unemployment rises, debt service costs, debt burden rises, that this may affect the solvency of Canadians?
I think that the conditions are right for it affecting the solvency of Canadians, but there are, so credit counselors can be there, reputable credit counselors to help them before they have to find an insolvency solution, and the insolvency system is there to provide them with the tools and resources and a fresh financial start, but yes.
If I may, all the counseling in the world isn't going to allow a person who has lost their job, who has taken on debt because of increased cost of living. This isn't a matter of people's financial literacy. This is a matter of loss of income.
Yeah. As I said, job loss is one of the main reasons for insolvency. So certainly in job loss situations, that's often what we see.
Right. So the unemployment, is that likely the key driver in people's inability to
there is a
minimum payment?
One key driver, but it's certainly a major one.
Okay. We also heard that while in the last year, overall credit increased by the indebtedness of Canadians increased by more than 4%. The number of debtors only increased by a little over 1%. So in other words, people are getting deeper in debt. We're not seeing new home buyers, for example, getting into home ownership. What we are seeing are existing debtors getting deeper in debt. Does this concern you as superintendent of insolvency?
It's the same category of concern that people are in difficult financial situations and will need to look for an insolvency solution. I think where we sit today with the numbers and the macroeconomic conditions, we are expecting a rise in insolvencies. Yes.
Okay, thank you. To Statistics Canada, I believe in your opening statement you said that food is now up to 9% of the average consumer's budget. Okay. We have Friedrich Institute reports that the taxes are now 43% of the average family budget. How does housing fit into that? You've got 43 going to tax, you've got 9% going to food. Housing is extraordinarily expensive. Where's housing in this?
Okay.
So we don't have precise numbers on the housing side, but that's something we could follow up with. We were quoting details from our household final expenditure series, which include housing-related expenses, transportation costs.
So you had a
different items under our household expenditure.
We've got some slightly older data from 2023 where the homeowners without mortgages spent about 14,000 on shelter, and those with mortgages spent on average 38,000 on shelter.
What about renters? Renters are a large portion of the population.
Yeah,
They don't. Not used to going up
they are a large portion of the population, but they may not be indebted in the same way with the mortgages.
Sorry, they're not indebted, but they will have non-mortgage debt, and their ability to service that non-mortgage debt will be affected by their rent. Okay. So non-mortgage debt is so 2/3 of households have significant non-mortgage debt. Is that correct? Did I hear that?
Yeah, credit card debt. Credit card debt's.
We get numbers. We don't necessarily have counts. We do have some information on, the number of households with a mortgage. 6 million households in Canada. Okay, non-mortgage. Exactly. That's what I'm saying. We don't have precise numbers.
Okay, I've only got about 20 seconds left. And I do want some clarity on the statistic that you discussed about the net worth quintile and how the top quintile affects the numbers. What is the cutoff? Like, what's the minimum to be in that top quintile?
Very short answer. Well, quintile is the top one would be the top 20% in terms of wealth.
And how much? What's the number?
Mr. Kelly, yeah, that's time. So the number of people.
The dollar amount.
That's my boy.
Thank you. We can continue the next round.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you to our colleagues and our witnesses for being here today.
I didn't know actually.
My first question is for Commissioner Miller. Currently, within the G7, Canada has the worst indebtedness for households among the G7 countries. We're at 103%, compared with Italy, which is at 36%. So if you were able to put into place one measure to help Canadians, what would it be?
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
Le président.
Thank you, Chair.
De m'imaginer dans la.
I'm not in the habit of imagining things that we could invent, because I think the tools we have now are very useful. And the supervision of banks and the tools that we have to assist people in being more familiar with their finances.
We found we do a monthly financial well-being monitor, so we track very closely to see how Canadians are doing and to see how we might help them with better tools and better supervision of the financial institutions.
It took me fucking 100 videos to comprendre ça. Ils sont tout le temps en train de faire ça en franglais. Ils commencent à parler en anglais, puis ils vont en français, puis ils vont en... No wonder their translators are in distress. No, am I? At least she speaks French. She has a good French accent, I think.
Merci pour la question.
Thank you for the question.
She has a different. Merci pour la question.
Le président.
Thank you, Chair.
De m'imaginer dans la.
I'm not in the habit of imagining things that we could invent, because I think that the tools we have now are very useful, and the supervision of banks and the tools that we have to assist people in being more familiar with their finances.
What we found, we do a monthly financial.
These people are getting paid $200,000 a fucking year. Bro, why do they have translators? Why are you fucking... What is this? We're just going to faire une démonstration de comment we can speak français and English, and now we're just going to parler français et anglais. Puis you know what? Let's throw a little Spanish in there. Hola, ¿cómo estás? Dos cervezas, por favor. ¿Dónde tu madre? Más leche. What else do we? I don't know. Let's throw fucking Mandarin in there. 你好，请问， Happy New Year. Go ahead, Facho. What the fuck is it? Fucking. You what shit. What the fuck did I say? I said it so much in my dreams to Chinese people now, and I've memorized it so much I forget it. Anyway, what the fuck is going on here? I mean, it doesn't. Just start speaking all the languages. Speak patois, which is a mix of French and fucking German. Speak German. Speak all the languages. What is this like Orwellian? Like it's not even. It's like some retard leftist, because the tactic is to fuck everything right. Like this Sun Tzu Chinese tactic. I mean, if we were to say we're usurped by China, is death by 1,000 paper cuts and just drive bureaucracy, right? So like, what? Like you just throw in every dumb idea just to like bog everything down, right? So before the liberals were filibustering for like 10 years, and then they were just outright just fucking not addressing any of the issues and just going, where are we? They're surface level address the issue and then follow up with we're taking care of it, don't worry about it, and then present zero numbers and zero, like they give you a basic plan, surface level, hey, this is the problem, we got this plan, we're gonna help you out. Can you give us numbers? No. He had no results for the last 15 years. Can we get some numbers? We need more money. Okay. And then now it's this, and then they're filibustering, and they're just outright not answering questions and diverting from questions, and then they took care of the filibustering, they took care of the avoiding questions. You have to answer questions now, and now they're doing this weird shit, which I don't understand the tactic of it. I don't get. And then they have the land acknowledgements. You have land acknowledgement, and then you have them like brain farting because they have to go from French to English because reasons, and then they have to pay the translators because reasons, and then they can't rustle their papers in front of their mics because the translators go into distress. And now I understand why they're in distress, because they have to fucking I want to know what a parliamentary translator's job looks like now that they're doing this shit. Like it's just like, is there a translator for this right now? Hey, do they stop talking when they start speaking the other language and start talking? Do they? You know what I mean? What the fuck? What the fuck is this? Anyway.
Well-being monitor. So we track very closely to see how Canadians are doing and to see how we might help them with better tools and better supervision of the financial institutions. And so we have seen trends of borrowing increasing, and percentages of income that are being spent on debt. But we also see that there are measures being taken to help both to prevent indebtedness, reduce indebtedness, and manage indebtedness. And I would say, if you were asking me in my fantasy life, I would do more of those things. I would create more programs like our low-cost, no-cost account commitments, like the NSF, ECAP, setting up e-alerts, things that will help people, particularly vulnerable Canadians, to manage their finances, because really what you want is you want a resilient population that can make good decisions given all the factors that they're facing. So, something like the mortgage guideline, which we put in place in 2023, has really helped to put banks in a position where they actually have to reach out to consumers that might be at risk of over-indebtedness to make sure that products are appropriate for them, as the law requires, and that they are not renewing at a rate that they cannot sustain.
Merci.
Thank you. Currently, we know that there are many people having a hard time paying their mortgages, and they're having a hard time adhering to their commitments. Do you think that this situation is going to get worse over the next 2 years?
Yes.
Je vais passer la... Oops. Oui, je vais passer la parole.
I'm going to pass the floor to Dr. Bombardier, who is responsible for insights and research.
And they're not going to say,
Thank you very much for the question.
it's the climate, it's everything but us.
As the commissioner mentioned, we have a number of tools that allow us to measure and follow what consumers are telling us. We do a lot of surveys on a monthly basis, and every 5 years we also work with an ecosystem of players in the financial system. We're not the only one. There, of course, are colleagues here with us at the table, but there are also many external organizations who do things to assist Canadians who are facing debt-related challenges. And within our strategy on financial literacy, we have a measurement plan, and we're evaluating the previous version of it, and we're undertaking the plan for the next version as Canadian measures. Your projections for the next 2 years, do you think it's going to continue to increase? If there's a significant impact on the ecosystem, then we have a good opportunity to improve the situation, but it requires a whole of ecosystem approach, and that's what we're doing with our financial literacy strategy. We're working along with our partners in the ecosystem. My next question is for Ms. Lang. The total number of insolvency and bankruptcy files has increased by 8%. In February 2026, the number of bankruptcies went up by 6.1%. And I'd like to hear from you. How do you see the next 2 years, given inflation that's been the case over the last year? The reasons for bankruptcy are complicated and numerous. And given the war in Iran, and if trade continues to be the case, according to the Canadian Association of Insolvency Professionals, there in 2009, we had the second highest level since the creation of the data collection by the superintendents of bankruptcy. So at this time, it was the result of the cost of life, not as a result of an elevated unemployment rate. Does this concern you?
That Canadians are struggling, but the system is there for them. Right now, our insolvency rate, as I provided in the materials, has not actually increased significantly. During the COVID recession, we had a very deep drop.
That's time.
Okay. Classic. That was a straight up nah. It seems like there's a
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
That kind of speaks to how everybody's more. Nah.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, okay. Oh, right. Who said that there? Seems like there's a. Could you speak to the 8% increase in bankruptcies? Nah. Seems like since COVID, seems like it's actually all right. Oh, ran out of time. And that other lady spoke and told us that she has strategies and they're working with things to make their financial literacy better. Oh, great. Perfect. I would have thought that you would have got the financial literacy done when you went to the fucking financing school or whatever fucking school you went to become a minister or whatever dickhead running the department. But apparently you go to school, you party, you don't pay a fucking pension, you nepotistically get your fucking job, or by the grace of God, fucking Iron Jesus gives you your fucking job because dickhead at the fucking corporate office decided to hire you that day. And now you're gonna get financially illiterate. Now that you're in power, you run everything, and everything's going to shit after fucking 15 years. We're actually now gonna work on financial literacy. This is straighten out all these fucking words. Bro, it's fucking typical Orwellian doublespeak. Financial literacy. The median average debt is actually not as bad as it was 5 years ago. The actual numbers look like we're shitting ourselves. Everybody is shitting and farting every day because groceries are expensive and gas is expensive. What is your answer to that? And that's where Canadian politics has been for the last 20 years. Please, China, come take over and start lining. I don't care who you line up. The good guy is a bad guy, start lining people up against the wall. I don't fucking kidding. I'm just kidding. Okay, I don't want Maoist fucking Pol Pot shit going on over here. But suffice it to say, what the fuck is the situation we've gotten ourselves into? The end of private communications in Canada. Yes, C-22 is fine. I get it. That's totally fine. They should be.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today I'll speak on Bill C-22, the Lawful Access Act, which asks Canadians to accept something very, very significant. It asks telecommunications providers across this country to build and maintain systems that allow government-authorized access to their networks.
I don't know what the penalties will be. Put them in jail, give them a fine. In England, they're going after people pretty hard for blatant. Going after a fucking ignorant, like, fucking everyday, you know, fucking lady who's, I don't know. Maybe I guess that you don't want to leave that unchecked. Pass it on her kids, but I mean, at the same time, if somebody just posts one thing on Facebook and they're just ingest, maybe they had a bad day, maybe they had a bad experience with a fucking newcomer. I don't know. I don't know.
It expands expectations around the collection and retention of so-called metadata, the time, the location, the connection details attached to the messages, and the internet activity.
Some of this, like, this is boring for me because some of this I actually agree with, like, the liberal policies and stuff like that. It's already, bro, if you're not already aware that you're being tracked, everything you fucking do on the internet is being tracked, you're thinking retarded. Every single thing you do, there's some computers, there's something registering it. So, like, there's no point in, like, you know what I mean? So I do my own taxes. I file taxes through auto tax shit. I don't review it all, but I don't have a problem paying my information to the government because they have advanced technology capabilities that can get your information. Your information is already out there. You have social insurance. I don't want to get my social insurance ever. They gave it to you. What do you mean? You have it because it's government issue. What are you talking about? Anyway, some of this stuff. I mean, if you're on the internet, you're getting tracked. Just like, what? Read a book. I don't fucking know. Get a fucking Kindle. If you don't want to fucking, what are you doing on your computer where you're worried about it? Like, you know what I mean? I don't think the government's trying to see what you're jerking off to on the daily. I mean, unless it's in nature. But at the same time, is Canada betraying its allies? Let's move on from this. Is Canada betraying its allies? The truth about, actually watch this too. I want to go to Lawton screen. Let's see. This is source 22. Let's see. Okay.
Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. It's a great honor, as always, to rise on behalf of the people of Elgin, St. Thomas, and London. This is an incredibly important issue, and it's one that as lawmakers we cannot afford to get wrong. On one hand, we are talking about ensuring that those enforcing the laws that we set out in this place have the tools and resources and laws in place to do their jobs. But on the other hand, it is about being a guardian of the most fundamental rights and freedoms that Canadians have: the right to due process, the right to privacy, the right to freedom from search and seizure. And I'm someone who understands and greatly values both of these things. I have the great privilege of sitting on the Justice Committee, where Conservative colleagues and I worked vigorously to ensure that real, tangible reforms to the bail system were put forward in government's inadequate, but again, it did something, bail bill C-14 not so long ago. And in fact, law enforcement had been telling us that they wanted more. They'd been telling us that the Liberal government had actually caused the bail problems in this country, and they wanted more to fix them, and we were happy to do that. But I've also been, as many people will know, very vocal. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker. It's a great honor, as always, to rise on behalf of the people of Elgin, St. Thomas, and London. This is an incredibly important issue, and it's one that as lawmakers we cannot afford to get wrong. On one hand, we are talking about ensuring that those enforcing the laws that we set out in this place have the tools and resources and laws in place to do their jobs. But on the other hand, it is about being a guardian of the most fundamental rights and freedoms that Canadians have: the right to due process, the right to privacy, the right to freedom from search and seizure. And I'm someone who understands and greatly values both of these things. I have the great privilege of sitting on Justice Committee, where Conservative colleagues and I worked vigorously to ensure that real, tangible reforms to the bail system were put forward in the government's inadequate, but again, it is something, bail bill C-14, not so long ago. And in fact, law enforcement had been telling us that they wanted more. They had been telling us that the Liberal government had actually caused the bail problems in this country, and they wanted more to fix them. And we were happy to do that. But I've also been, as many people will know, very vocal, even before I was elected to this place, in calling out decisions and bills by this government that erode not just trust in institutions, but erode civil liberties of Canadians. And I've seen this firsthand since I had the great privilege of being elected just shy of 1 year ago. The government's very first bill was presented to Canadians, presented to this House, Bill C-2, as a border security bill. And again, I've been among those talking for years about how this government has allowed the borders of this country to become a joke. I welcomed them recognizing there was a problem. But when we looked into the bill, we saw that lawful access provisions had actually been snuck in. We also saw that this bill, which again was presented to Canadians as being an answer to the border crisis, had inexplicably a ban on transacting in cash above a certain amount. That is not something that Canadians wanted. And it's actually something that Canadians rejected so vociferously, the Liberals thankfully decided to, among other things, pull that aside and not proceed with it. Bill C-2 also had the ability to warrantlessly inspect Canadians' letter mail. Letters that Canadians send to us as members of Parliament, even letters that someone might send to a loved one across the country. Those would have been subject to warrantless scrutiny by Canada Post. So we had to look into the details of Bill C-2. And in doing so, we found that it could not be supported. And then we saw Bill C-8. Again, on the surface, something that we want and welcome, which is a legislation that deals with very real threats to cybersecurity infrastructure, very real threats that companies and countries face. And this was something that, again, I thought we would be able to find common ground on across party lines. But the devil, as always, is in the details. We looked in C8, and I thank my colleague from Kitchener South Hespeler, I thank my colleague from Kamloops Thompson Nicola for their work on this. We saw that this was actually giving the Minister of Industry and cabinet members of this Liberal government incredible power to take people or companies offline with no oversight, with no scrutiny. And I'm so proud to be part of a team that understood that enforcing the law, protecting Canada from threats, cannot and need not come at the expense of fundamental rights and freedoms, at the expense of civil liberties. Conservatives worked collaboratively with our colleagues in the Bloc, and we put forward amendments that dealt with these challenges. But now we have Bill C-22, a bill that repackages a lot of what was already in C-2, repackages a lot of what had already been rejected by Canadians, and it puts it forward for review. Now, fortunately, the Liberals have finally understood the essence of some of these challenges. Part 1 of the bill, I'm very grateful, they have eliminated some of the most problematic components of it. And I will give credit where it's due. Again, I think they should have been more keenly aware of these things from the get-go. But there have actually been significant improvements. Now, that being said, the lack of oversight on some of the parts of C2 are, I think, very much warranting scrutiny here. And why I bring this up, why it's so important, is because the reason there has been such pushback on Bill C-22 so far, from civil liberties groups in particular on the left and the right, is because this Liberal government has squandered the trust that Canadians have and can have in government, specifically in this government, because of the way that this government has eroded civil liberties in the past. Again, as I say this, I'm reminded of the fact that these Liberals a few weeks ago filed an appeal to the Supreme Court of Canada in their Emergencies Act usage just over 4 years ago. And why that's relevant is because what the federal court and federal court of appeal have found is that this government violated the charter rights of Canadians by not only unlawfully invoking the Emergencies Act, but by using the fake emergency to justify freezing people's bank accounts. Now, this was one of the reasons that our amendments in Bill C-8 included conscience and speech protections. Because history, recent history, Liberal government history, has revealed precisely why those protections are necessary. And why when people come up with scenarios, we don't actually take seriously the Liberals trying to dismiss them by saying that would never happen. It would never get there. Because we've seen them go there already. We've seen them go down roads that most people never would have thought possible. Using language, plain language, that we must take at its word and take at face value. The Liberal government has not been constrained by the Charter. The Liberal government has not been constrained by norms. So that's why Canadians from the International Civil Liberties Monitoring Group to the Justice Centre for Constitutional Freedoms have raised concerns about C-22. That being said, I do have to acknowledge the very real demands that law enforcement have made. And I've taken the responsibility on, not just as a member of the Justice Committee, but as the Member of Parliament for Elgin, St. Thomas, and London, to talk to law enforcement, to speak to them exactly about the shortcomings they feel exist in the current system. Now, one thing I will point out is that they welcome having expanded powers and clear authority. They welcome a lot of what is in Bill C-22. I spoke last week to Chief Tai Trong, who's the chief of the London Police Service. Again, a very large police service given London's size. I also spoke to Chief Mark Rosskamp of the St. Thomas Police Service. I've spoken to other frontline officers, and I'm happy to continue doing this work because, unlike the Liberal government, this party has a history of listening to law enforcement. Listening to them when they say they don't want anything to do with the Liberal government's gun confiscation scheme. Listening to them when they say they need real bail reform so they're not arresting the same people over and over again. And listening to them when they say there are tools and clarifications they need to do their jobs. And we'll continue to do that. The men and women of law enforcement in my riding and across the country want to take bad guys off the streets. And we as a party want to make sure they have the tools and resources to do that. It's not entirely accurate to say that Canada has no lawful access regime. Police have been able to access subscriber data. They've been able to access electronic materials. They've been able to get warrants to search people's computers and phones and accounts. The issue is that there is not the speed they need when dealing with it. And that's something where I think we welcome anything that provides an opportunity to lawfully and with judicial oversight access the type of information at play here. But we cannot look at any of these things in isolation. We cannot look at simply being able to confirm subscriber data for perhaps an offender that is, or a suspected offender that is possessing or producing or disseminating child sexual exploitation and abuse material, and say that that will solve the overall problems. We have to look at lawful access in the same vein as we look at other things in the criminal justice system that would interact with that suspected offender, such as, for example, the sentence they're going to get. As I speak, my committee is reviewing, well, not as I speak at this exact moment, but this week, my committee is reviewing Bill C-16. And we're saying that the Liberal government is jeopardizing mandatory minimum sentences for people who peddle in child sexual exploitation and abuse material. And we believe wholeheartedly the government needs to have robust punishments to vigorously go after these heinous predators. So what the Liberal government has been doing, not just in lawful access, but in other justice bills that have come before them, is selectively deciding when they want to listen to law enforcement and when they don't. Selectively deciding when they want to hide behind this stakeholder or that stakeholder and when they don't. We are the lawmakers in this chamber. It is an honor I do not take lightly. We have to listen to all stakeholders. and come to a reasoned constitutional position that balances the rights and needs of a free citizenry in this country with the practical expectations and needs of law enforcement to effectively discharge their duties. And that is a balance that we need to get right. And it's a balance that we need to get right simply because it is our duty, but also because the last thing we want to do is pass a law that we will have to somehow find a way to fix years later if a court finds it to be unconstitutional. And this is the tricky thing we have to deal with here. We cannot pass law that will not withstand charter scrutiny. Now, interestingly, on Bill C-8, when I mentioned the tremendous work of my colleagues on the Public Safety Committee and other colleagues in caucus, Bill C-8 had actually been amended by conservative efforts with the support of the bloc to have judicial oversight for some decisions that the minister would make. And that was so important, and in the end, it was unfortunate that this was ruled out of scope when it came back to the House. Because that would have been an incredibly important safeguard that would have said to Canadians, we are not giving unchecked power to cabinet ministers. Cabinet ministers representing a government that, by the way, does not have a great track record on upholding civil liberties. Cabinet ministers who, when they say just trust us, you might as well play the laugh track from a 90s sitcom because that's about as much as it's worth. So we are always going to approach anything that looks like surveillance or a violation of privacy rights with a level of skepticism. And when the Liberals come with bills that touch on these issues, they should not dismiss these very real and, I would say, good faith concerns that people across this country are making because of that lack of distrust that I was talking about. And when we look at some of the details here, there is a blanket retention of metadata. But so much of our personal information is captured. And so much of what is in metadata is not actually as anonymized as people may think. You know, for example, comparing this to other jurisdictions, in the United States, the Electronic Communications Privacy Act allows for preservation of metadata on demand, but it doesn't require blanket retention. It doesn't even allow blanket retention. The Court of Justice of the European Union has declared that blanket retention of metadata is incompatible with the fundamental rights that Europeans have, especially when it comes to privacy. When we look at electronic service providers, specifically the applications in Part 2 of the bill, we don't actually have a definition of what a service provider is. We only have the expectation that the government will come up with a definition down the road. So this category could actually include email providers. It could include messaging apps. It could include other cloud services and storage systems. It isn't just about whether you have a TELUS account or whether you have a Rogers account. It could actually extend to your accounts that have content. And that's where we're getting into. Accessing someone's electronic information is truly accessing a window into their lives, their most intimate experiences, thoughts, conversations, photos. So we cannot afford to not get this right. I would much rather see a cohesive definition of what that category would be, not something that could be redefined based on the whims of not just this government, but future governments. Because, Mr. Speaker, as you well know, if we are talking about any legislated power for government, for cabinet, for law enforcement, we have to imagine what that power will look like in the hands of another government that comes beyond. And this is where this is not a partisan issue. It's where I look beyond the left versus right on this. I don't want my colleagues on the left to be concerned about how a theoretical conservative government that would abuse civil liberties, which is not certainly the conservative.
He says, yeah, he essentially hits the nail on the head. He says he covers all his fucking bases. Just want either side to be able to take advantage of this bill, which would allow us to, it would essentially allow Canada to become like the UK, where they're just tossing people in the fucking gulags or finding people because they made a stupid Facebook post because they're ignorant. It's like, how about we just give them a chance, and then if they go on to, start fucking putting on white cloaks and fucking lighting up Twitter They have a long history of being a racist bigot. No, then okay, they'd probably just fucking change story. Slim the rules for twisting themselves into a pretzel. Texas interest. We're living on borrowed time. Exercising our candidates hidden debt. Yeah, we kind of. I think we went over this again. This was very.
First, we have, as an individual, Mr. Charles St. Arnaud. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and honorable member of the committee. It's a pleasure to be here making my first ever appearance in front of the House of Common Committee. And thank you also for the opportunity of sharing my expertise with you. Household debt in Canada is elevated and has been exceeding 170% of disposable income for the past roughly 15 years. Canadian households are the third most indebted in the 44 countries that the BIS, the Bank of International Settlement, is tracking. We're just behind Switzerland and Australia. As a result of the elevated level of debt, the average Canadian household must spend about 15% of its disposable income just to make the obligated payments on that debt. That's including both interest and principal. Given that some households are debt-free, we can imagine that the debt service ratio is likely to be significantly higher for some proportion of the population. The high level of household debt renders the Canadian economy more vulnerable to shock. In recent years, household finance have been under pressure due to the erosion of purchasing power resulting from higher inflation and weak income growth and from higher interest rates. This has led to an increase in household financial stress. However, there are some signs that the economic system is flexible, allowing households to adapt to the higher interest rate environments. As such, while consumers' insolvencies have increased sharply in recent years and are approaching their highest levels since the global financial crisis, the increase is mainly in proposal, mainly what could be seen as renegotiation of terms of those lending rather than bankruptcies. As a reference, bankruptcies are currently 40% lower than they were pre-pandemic and account for less than 25% of total insolvencies, compared to about 40% of insolvencies pre-pandemic and 80% of insolvencies during the global financial crisis. There is evidence that households are lengthening the amortization period of their debt to reduce the impact of higher interest rates on their debt payments. While this means that households will carry debt for longer and increase the total debt cost, it has prevented a surge in the debt service ratio in recent years, making their debt more sustainable. This flexibility only exists because household income has remained solid in recent years. The resilience of the labor market in recent years, characterized by a lack of major layoffs, has played a crucial role here. Any significant increase in layoffs leading to a decline in income would rapidly remove the flexibility in the system, with potentially serious consequences for household financial situations, Canada's financial system, and the economic outlook. Hence, the increased economic vulnerability caused by high level of household indebtedness. The high level of household debt has also had some broad structural impact on the Canadian economy. There is evidence that the constant high household borrowing over the past 30 years, at an average pace of about 44% of GDP per year, has crowded out business investment, thereby negatively affecting productivity growth over the past few decades. This is very similar to how big government spending and deficits in the late 1970s and 1980s crowded out business investments. The result can be seen in the fact that Canadians were recently spending almost as much as a share of GDP on home renovation and home ownership transfer costs, in other words, exchanging homes, than they did on machinery, equipment, and intellectual property. There is an important feedback loop between poor productivity, growth, affordability, and household finance. Weak productivity growth led to tepid salary gains and stagnant income. As such, disposable income per person adjusted for inflation, a measure of the purchasing power, has been growing at a full percentage point slower pace on average over the past or since 2015 than it was between 1995 and 2015. This means that the cumulative impact of that slower gains in purchasing power means that Canadians have lost about 10% in purchasing power compared to where they should be if income growth had remained the same. Let me conclude with this important point on the subject. The affordability crisis and the increase in financial stress are as much an issue of underperforming incomes as they are of rising costs. And with this, I will happy to answer the members of the committee's questions.
Thank you very much. Next, we have from Consolidated Credit Canada, Mr. Jeffrey Schwartz.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today as part of your study on consumer debt in Canada. My name is Jeff Schwartz, and I'm the Executive Director of Consolidated Credit Canada, and we're an accredited nonprofit credit counseling agency. We help Canadians consolidate and pay off unsecured debt, often at reduced or zero interest, while providing the financial literacy education that prevents debt crises before they begin. In the past year alone, Consolidated Credit supported approximately 125,000 Canadians through education, counseling, and debt management services. The average unsecured debt load among our clients was close to $20,000. I want to focus my remarks on 3 points today: the critical role of financial literacy, the need for consistent and equitable funding, and why accredited nonprofit agencies must be central partners in any national strategy to address consumer debt. Mr. Chair, education is our best and first line of defense. By the time a Canadian reaches our office in financial distress, the damage is often done. The goal must be to reach them before that point, before the impossible choice between heating the home and making a minimum payment. Accredited nonprofit agencies like ours deliver preventative financial literacy every single day. We teach Canadians how to budget, how to understand credit, and how to recognize the warning signs of economic abuse and coerced debt. This work is the foundational infrastructure for a healthy financial system. That brings me to my second point: funding. Accredited agencies are primarily funded by financial institutions through a share of the debt we help our clients repay, typically between 10 and 20% of the principal. This model works. Banks recover debts that might otherwise default, Canadians avoid insolvency, and the economy benefits from households that remain financially stable. The problem is that not every institution participates fairly. The majority of Canada's federally regulated institutions demonstrate leadership by contributing to this ecosystem. However, a small number of large institutions do not. These outliers benefit directly from our services, yet they do not invest a single dollar in the infrastructure that makes those outcomes possible. This is a free rider problem. It distorts the marketplace, it strains the capacity of agencies like ours, and ultimately, it harms the Canadians we are trying to serve. Our internal estimates suggest that if these non-participating institutions contributed fairly, Consolidated Credit alone could support an additional 21,000 Canadians annually, while significantly expanding preventative outreach to underserved and high-risk populations. We are asking the government to use the power of moral suasion through mechanisms like the proposed Code of Conduct for the Prevention of Economic Abuse to set clear expectations that all participating banks provide annual financial support to accredited nonprofit credit counseling agencies. Transparency is a powerful tool. Public disclosure of institutional participation would encourage fair play without the need for prescriptive legislation. Finally, Mr. Chair, I want to speak to our role as essential partners in the financial protection ecosystem. Accredited nonprofit credit counseling agencies are uniquely positioned to serve Canadians in financial distress. We provide client-centered care. When a survivor of economic abuse needs to untangle coerced debt from their credit profile, they need expert intervention, not a pamphlet. Government departments, financial institutions, and regulators should view us not as an afterthought, but as the primary delivery mechanism for financial literacy and debt remediation. We urge you to recommend that departments, ministries, and financial institutions formalize their partnerships with us, and that the funding to sustain this work be consistent, equitable, and transparent. Now, in conclusion, Mr. Chair, Canadians are asking for a fair chance, a chance to learn, to recover, and to build a secure financial future. With consistent funding In genuine partnership, accredited agencies like Consolidated Credit can help tens of thousands more Canadians each year avoid the dead end of insolvency. Thank you, and I welcome your questions.
Company, but okay.
Thank you, Mr. Schwartz. Next, we have from Raymond Chabot Inc., Guillaume Amiot. 5 minutes.
Bonjour. Donc, Monsieur le Président, membres du comité, je vais me permettre de faire mon allocution en français. D'emblée, je vous remercie pour l'invitation qu'on parle dans le cadre de votre étude sur les répercussions de la dette des consommateurs au Canada. Je suis directeur principal en redressement et insolvabilité chez Raymond Chabot, filiale de Raymond Chabot Grant Thornton. J'exerce à titre de syndic autorisant d'insolvabilité que j'appellerais des syndics ou SAI, une profession réglementée par l'organisme fédéral connu comme le Bureau du surintendant des faillites, que j'appellerais le BSF. J'agis donc au quotidien comme praticien en matière d'insolvabilité et de redressement des consommateurs et des entreprises. Également, je suis président du Conseil des syndics autorisés en insolvabilité du Québec. Cet organisme regroupe près de 225 syndics pratiquants au Québec. D'emblée, je juge le point de départ de votre étude comme pleinement fondé. Mon expérience pratique me permet d'affirmer que le problème dépasse les tendances macroéconomiques et les récentes statistiques, lesquelles démontrent l'augmentation du ratio de la dette des ménages et de l'insolvabilité des consommateurs. En effet, le profil des débiteurs canadiens confrontés à l'insolvabilité s'est transformé ces dernières années. De nouveaux groupes de consommateurs, auparavant moins représentés dans les cas d'insolvabilité, apparaissent désormais, comme les personnes âgées, les travailleurs ayant des revenus fluctuants ou les familles monoparentales. Par ailleurs, la hausse des problèmes de santé mentale et la facilité d'accès aux jeux en ligne sont d'autant de facteurs qui influencent quotidiennement les situations d'insolvabilité. Quant à la classe moyenne, il ne s'agit généralement pas d'un seul mauvais choix qui les mène vers l'insolvabilité. C'est plutôt une succession de chocs et d'augmentation de coûts qui réduisent progressivement leur capacité financière. De nombreuses personnes vivent de paye en paye avec peu de marge de manœuvre alors que le coût de la vie a fortement augmenté. Au final, il devient difficile pour les consommateurs d'équilibrer leur budget et un événement de la vie, une maladie ou une perte d'emploi, peut rapidement faire basculer le consommateur vers l'insolvabilité. Lorsque la liquidité s'épuise, le crédit non hypothécaire devient un outil de suivi budgétaire.
Je vois que le député de Mirabel est d'accord. Moi aussi, je pense qu'en effet, on a beaucoup trop insisté sur le côté de la demande, notamment seulement avec des taux d'intérêt hyper bas pendant trop longtemps, mais aussi toutes les mesures qu'on a par la suite mises en œuvre aussi pour faciliter l'accès au crédit, comme les hypothèques sur 40 ans, zéro down payment, des trucs comme ça, qui a conduit à un endettement, en effet, un endettement excessif. Alors, la question, c'est comment est-ce qu'on va régler ça? Et je pense que ça va se régler en mettant l'accent cette fois-ci sur le côté de l'offre. Des mesures, des politiques publiques, des mesures qui vont cibler l'augmentation de la capacité productive de l'économie canadienne. Mais là, ça va arriver. Pensez-vous pas qu'il faut aussi quand même faire attention au côté de l'endettement des consommateurs, parce que si on va trop rapidement avec des mesures pour stimuler, pour favoriser le côté de l'offre, et donc l'investissement des entreprises, etc., qu'on pourrait créer un choc de crédit pour le consommateur. Si le crédit devient plus cher, moins disponible, ça aussi, ça peut déclencher des problèmes, non?
Oui, je suis d'accord avec toi. Il faut balancer les deux approches et s'assurer qu'on ait une transition ou une réduction de l'endettement qui est relativement constante et graduelle.
Mr. St. Arnold, that concludes the round. Next, we have Mr. Bennell for 2.5 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'aimerais revenir avec vous, M. Amiot. D'ailleurs, je suis content que M. Letao ait dit qu'on était d'accord sur quelque chose. Ça peut arriver une fois de temps en temps. Il y a toujours la façon de faire, cependant. M. Amiot, j'aimerais que vous nous parliez des aînés, parce que dans le document de déclaration d'ouverture, etc., que vous avez fourni, vous avez dit que certains aînés avaient beaucoup de difficultés
difficultés, se ramassaient dans votre bureau, devaient faire des restructurations de leurs finances. J'aimerais que vous nous disiez un peu c'est quoi le profil type d'une personne, par exemple, de 65 ans et plus qui a des problèmes financiers, d'où ça vient, est-ce que c'est parce qu'ils ont des revenus fixes, est-ce que vous leur demandez de retourner travailler, etc. J'aimerais, peut-être en une minute et demie, que vous nous fassiez un peu un profil type, évidemment avec toutes les nuances qui s'imposent.
Plus en plus dans nos bureaux. En fait, c'est généralement les personnes âgées qu'on voit, c'est des gens, oui, qui bénéficient d'un revenu fixe, que ce soit les rentes, les pensions publiques ou les prestations. Et généralement, évidemment, ces revenus-là sont peu ou pas ajustables. Et donc, l'inflation qui les touche, ben, ils n'ont pas de capacité nécessairement, ou très peu de capacité d'augmenter leurs revenus, si ce n'est de retourner là, sur le marché du travail. Donc, généralement, ceux qu'on voit dans notre bureau, c'est des gens qui ne seront pas nécessairement propriétaires d'une résidence, propriétaires fonciers ou qui ont des grandes valeurs accumulées, mais qui sont plus face à des régimes publics ou des régimes à revenus fixes. Et c'est sûr aussi, ces personnes âgées-là ont moins...
Financial education, the best
Sorry about that. Just back on here.
To rise on behalf of the people from Kamloops, Thompson, Nicola, and we're only about an hour and a half into it, and this is my third time rising. What an honor it is to be able to speak in the House of Commons, not only so frequently, but to matters of such import. So these are really important issues that we are dealing with today. Sometimes we deal with things that are quite performative in this House, but I can candidly say today this is an issue of fairly significant importance. Pardon me. Mr. Speaker, before I do that, though, I want to recognize one of my very good friends who is celebrating a birthday, the Big 4-8. Philip Lee is 48 years old, somebody I went to high school with and I've known for the past, 36 years now. We've had the opportunity to travel together, and he's been a wonderful friend, and I would like to wish Phil all the best in the upcoming year. Mr. Speaker, I also want to recognize two people from Kamloops who accomplished something really significant. Johnny Hicks and Brady Milburn were part of the Denver Pioneers Hockey Club, and that club is part of the NCAA, and this weekend they were crowned men's NCAA champions, I should say. So to Johnny and Brady, who are both Kamloops products, I congratulate you and the whole Denver Pioneers team. Winning the NCAA championships is a tremendous accomplishment. Mr. Speaker, what brings us here is Bill C-22, but we have to look at the past in order to inform how we got here. Bill C-2 was heralded as a cure-all, a panacea, if you will, as to all things that ailed the justice system. If only we could pass Bill C-2, everything would be fine. And unfortunately, we heard that before in this House. For years, we were told that there were no issues with bail. For years, we were told there were no issues with sentencing. And yet, here we are now with a, air quote, new government with many of the same cabinet ministers as the old government, and we are still dealing with the same issues. I believe that the minister referenced Commissioner Creek talking about this type of legislation going way back to 1997, I believe he said. In fact, Conservatives put forward legislation on lawful access and were roundly mocked by Liberals. There's a famous quote, I'm not going to repeat it in here today, but that stemmed from that very debate. And then now we hear about how there's a rush to get this legislation in, and I understand why lawful access is so important. But if there was a rush, then why were the Liberals opposed to it in the last decade? If there was a rush, why has it taken this Liberal government 11 years in order to bring this forward? If there was a rush, why was Bill C-2 so clumsily drafted? We are here because of Bill C-2. In fact, if we look at portions of Bill C-2, we now have two bills, Mr. Speaker, that have stemmed from Bill C-2. We have Bill C-12, and we have Bill C-22. And both of those bills have dramatically remodeled what was contained in Bill C-2. In fact, Bill C-12 renovated so much of the information or the text of Bill C-2 that it underwent further amendments at committee, and I believe that my colleague, the Shadow Minister for Immigration, the member from Calgary, Rose Hill, really did a great deal of work, produced a number of amendments that were supported by the government or supported by the bloc that ultimately made it into the bill. That bill was a substantially better version of portions of C-2. What are we having here in Bill C-22? We have parts 14 and 15 of Bill C-2. Now, one of the things that always strikes me is how we've heard in the past, and we as Conservatives, we would hear criticisms about pieces of legislation. It created pieces of legislation, well over 100 pages. That was omnibus to the point where we've now got 2 bills that have stemmed from it, and I think we probably have 3 or 4 distinct subject matters that are contained within Bill C2 that still haven't been addressed. So the bill part, Bill C2 that we have now, is this notion of lawful access. Now, I'm going to focus on what's in Bill C2, but I'm also going to focus on some of the concerns that I have. And the concerns here, and my hope is that the government will take these concerns legitimately, and that we can proceed in the spirit of open and constructive dialogue. In fact, my colleague from Bruce Grey Owen Sound just asked a question. He sits on the National Security Committee, commonly known as NSICOP, which provides secret and confidential advice to the Prime Minister. Those who are on the committee are not permitted to speak about anything that is discussed in committee, or they're subject to the very significant penalties in the criminal law. But one thing that my colleague and friend from Bruce Grey Owen Sound just spoke about was the necessity from NSICOP's point of view of lawful access, but also what should be in that legislation. So as conservatives, we will always take the position that initiatives to help law enforcement, initiatives that make law enforcement's ability to do their jobs more easily is something that we will always be open to. But, and here's the but, we have to make sure that those revisions to the law are both charter compliant and are consistent with the rights of privacy that we believe all Canadians should enjoy, Mr. Speaker. This government has in the past, in my view, tried to overstep its boundaries at times. Bill C2 in parts 14 and 15 is an example of that, going so far, using language like any. We saw that in Bill C8 as well. Any threat, any action. So Bill C2 wanted essentially the government to have access to any information. Well, that goes a little bit far. In fact, it goes quite too far. So I was happy to see that the government, at the very least, went back to the drawing board. I know that the previous question from the government was the Conservatives could have just passed this in Bill C2. Well, no, the Conservatives would have passed this in Bill C2 because Bill C2 was a poorly written piece of legislation. And if Conservatives were going to pass it in Bill C2, or should have passed it in Bill C2, then the government should have put forward a better piece of legislation. I would go so far as to say, Mr. Speaker, that the government is admitting such because of the fact that they put forward Bill C-22. If Bill C-2 had no issues with it, if it did not, in the eyes of experts throughout the country, take significant liberties at privacy rights and things like that, then we wouldn't be here today. The fact that the government put forward Bill C-22 is itself an admission that Bill C-2 in an omnibus form was unfortunately poorly drafted, and that is what brings us here today. So what are some of the things in Bill C-2? Well, the first part we're looking at, three parts. The first part we're looking at is tools for law enforcement to access digital information. I don't believe that this is going to be a controversial part of the bill. Right now, based on decisions from the Supreme Court of Canada in roughly the last 12 years, law enforcement has to write a great number of, get a number of court orders. That's where I'll put them. Another way to put it is judicial authorization. Some people call them warrants. They often take the form of a warrant or a production order. An order to a business saying, is Frank Caputo your subscriber, yes or no? And then please produce all of Frank Caputo's subscriber information. Those may be two distinct questions. Problem there is that this takes time. Every time somebody has to go and get a court order, somebody has to write up that court order. They have to swear an affidavit in support of that court order. So that does take time. As conservatives, we recognize that when there are inefficient deficiencies in the law, we need to address them. So that is something that I don't think people take a great deal of issue with. But, and here's the but, sometimes the devil's in the details, and we need to ask further questions about those things. For instance, the current process when it comes to subscriber information is informed by a decision of Regina and Spencer. Now, that decision came out in 2014, and Spencer impacted the obtaining of production orders, and just to put it colloquially, and I'm sure somebody's going to be looking at the head note of Spencer, comparing my words. So I'm just talking generally here. I'm not talking with the legal precision that I would in court. We are looking at getting production orders for just about everything that may have, for which a subscriber may have an expectation of privacy. That is changed in Bill C-22. Bajkovitz was another really key decision of this court 10 years after Spencer, talking about, I believe Bajkovitz was about an expectation of privacy, that there's an expectation of privacy in a person's IP address. Now, this was significant because most people don't know their IP address. A lot of people don't even know that they have an IP address. And if they do know they have an IP address, they may not even know how they get it. So when Bajkovitz said there's an expectation of privacy in that, I believe that some legal scholars were saying, okay, well, that's interesting, and I'm not here to take hot shots at decisions. I'm here to recognize what the issue is. Because whenever there's an expectation of privacy, then you need a search that's authorized by law through a court order. That meant that a court order was required to get an IP address, even though an IP address was essentially akin to finding a phone number in phone book. That's the analogy, as I recall. Most of us in this house will remember phone books. The member for Kenora probably doesn't, but he's probably the only one. But the rest of us do remember when it was left to get phone books, and let's face it, phone books were everywhere. You could find anything. Anybody, as I understand it, with some semblance of digital acumen would be able to get this. Nonetheless, the court said that there's an expectation of privacy. So those are all issues that we are dealing with right now within the current framework that as I understand it, Part 1 does address. We're looking at these offenses as well. Let's not forget that these are often offenses against children and terrorist offenses. Those are the two offenses that, for me, are probably of most interest to legislators in this House, is how do we address those things. Now, Part 2, let's get into Part 2 a little bit, and I've skipped over some of Part 1 because I do want to get Part 2 what it requires in terms of debate. Part 2 talks about ministerial orders, and I'm mindful of the fact that it's the Intelligence Commissioner now has a role to play within those these ministerial orders. The problem that I see, or the thing that I think we need to look at, or that I would want more information on as I craft my position, and conservatives craft our position on this, is when you have a ministerial order that is secret, I believe the government should be prepared to substantiate why is it secret, and should it be secret in every single instance. So, for instance, we spoke about NSICOP recently. Everything that speaks about national security is going to be top secret. So there may be a place for saying, yes, if this is going to impact national security, but does that mean that every single ministerial order is going to be secret, or should be secret? And furthermore, when it comes to the Intelligence Commissioner, precisely what role will that person play, and how will their independent oversight impact a number of the concerns? One of the key areas that Part 2 of Bill C-22 impacts, Mr. Speaker, is that it compels third parties to keep information. I want to be very clear here that the information on my reading, number one, I'd love...
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Within the legislation, you will find there's substantive aspects of the legislation to protect privacy of Canadians. And it was interesting when the member made reference to the phone books. I remember the phone books. I remember them quite well. In fact, it was the Who Called Me. The Who Called Me book was based on addresses. You could actually go into an area, list of addresses followed by a phone number, and you could find out who was in the home. We have advanced through the internet, the digital era, and the need for law enforcement officers to have this important tool is absolutely critical. My question is, does the member agree that we need to modernize, and can we anticipate that the Conservative Party will be supporting Bill C-22?
Honourable Member Kamloops Thompson Nicola.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I thank the member for that question. I mean, we always need to modernize in law. I was actually speaking about it this morning when I was speaking about my private member's bill. The moment we stop pushing here, the moment we are complacent in any law, but especially in the criminal law, we have an issue. The law is often years behind when it comes to technology. The member will have heard me reference Spencer, which was a decision from 2014. So as conservatives, we will always be open to modernization of law. Right now, what we're doing and what we're evaluating in debate with respect to this bill, whether this is the right way to modernize the law. There's no issue that we all want less crime, that we all want the police to be able to do their jobs. The question that I have and that we have is that is Bill C-22 the appropriate mechanism to do so? Thank you.
Questions or comments? The Honourable Member for Shefford. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his speech. I listened to the Justice Minister earlier, Mr. Speaker, when he spoke on Bill C-22, and he said that he had consulted, and yet with C-22, we know that it's a second attempt to legislate on this issue after C2, but there are external observers who say that this only fixes some of the problems that had been raised by so many with Bill C2. I'd like to ask my colleague what he thinks. There are many specialists who weren't consulted on this. The Honourable Member for Kamloops Thompson Nicola.
I'd like to thank my honourable colleague from Quebec for her question, Mr. Speaker. I would agree. Sometimes we get legislation before us in this House where we say, you know what, we can all agree to this, or you know, there's some tweaks that need to be had. This Parliament, I think, has worked a lot better than the last Parliament did in terms of moving things forward on which we can all agree. In specific response to my colleague's question, there are certainly a number of questions that arise within this bill, particularly on Part 2. So if we are going to address this and develop our positions, I don't think it's a bad thing to ask the questions in debate here and develop our positions from there. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Honourable Member Bruce Gray, one sound.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to ask my honourable colleague to build upon what he mentioned in his speech about his own experience as a public prosecutor, specifically around this data bit, because NSTOP, we found on that committee that there, without a general requirement for these CSPs to retain metadata, i.e. the address book for a specific time, that when a warrant is then sought, there's a possibility that that data is no longer available, which makes it very difficult for some of these very heinous crimes to put these persecutors or these alleged persecutors away. So I just want, because I don't want to get into the challenges of the bill as much as the requirement why we as a Parliament need to address this important piece of public safety here in Canada.
This is a very important question, and I thank my colleague Bruce Gray Sound for the question. Evidence is required in any sort of prosecution. So what my colleague is asking about, in my view, is, well, how do we deal with the gaps between evidence that exists now but may not exist tomorrow? That's essentially what I take his question to be. And if I'm taking his question appropriately or properly, now it is, and Secop has said, there is a gap. For instance, I just mentioned that 30-day gap between ISP addresses and how long they go. This is clearly something that Canadian law has to do.
In this Parliament, well, I'll ask if he agrees, never been anything, not only in this Parliament, but in any Parliament of Canada, where a single bill, originally C2, the Strong Borders Act was so universally panned and attacked by so many civil society groups, a coalition of more than 300, that the bill then had to morph from C2 to C12, and now to try to get to warrantless access, C22. There's never been a course of legislation like this. And I'd ask my honorable colleague, with whom I agreed on many of his attempts to improve the bill in committee, if he doesn't think that at this point we're getting closer. We've at least gotten rid of the original provisions that post office employees could open the mail without a warrant. Perhaps the member for Winnipeg North may be the only member in this place who laments C2.
I'm going to interrupt the member. Before I go to the member for Kamloops Thompson Nickel, I think it's incumbent on all members when they are joining the chamber using Zoom to ensure that they're in a place where there's nobody else on camera, also not visible in the background, just for the dignity and decorum of this place. And with that being said, I'll turn it over to member Kamloops Thompson Nicola.
Well, I think my honourable colleague from Sandwich Gulf Islands, and she referenced my colleague from Winnipeg and how much we have debated about whether Canada Post can open your mail. So I'm not going to get into that for what would probably be the 32nd time or so. I do agree with my colleague on the point of C2 morphing into C12, now morphing into C22, and this tacit acknowledgement of, wow, we really got it wrong. Not only did we get it wrong on one thing, we got it wrong on multiple things because we're not even pursuing C2 as a government. This is the government, from the government's point of view. We got C12 right enough for it to pass, and now we're trying to get Bill C22 right enough for it to pass. When it comes to part one of this bill, what I do notice is that, for instance, the police or a state actor can't go and get information from anybody, from like a general practitioner, from Facebook, groups like that. It's strictly restricted to telecoms, so we can see the government really pulling back on what they were seeking from this, and I think that is an acknowledgement that C2 really did miss the mark. Thank you.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, the Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to go back to my original question that I just had asked the member, because I think it's important. The member and the Conservatives now have had a couple of weeks to look at the legislation itself, but a lot of it originates out of Bill C2. So they've had the opportunity to really get a good understanding in terms of the direction the government is going on lawful access. Can we expect the Conservative Party of Canada to support lawful access?
Bill C-22 is a complicated bill. Bill C-2 was a box breakfast, to put it mildly. I don't know that I would be saying that we should build on anything from that. We're looking at the bill, and that member will know when we have our position. We're going to scrutinize this bill and give it the scrutiny it deserves on behalf of Canadians. Thank you.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? The Honourable member for Bruce Grey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When NSICOP studied this, one of the recommendations that the committee discovered was that there should be a national authority established and identified for lawful access and intercept initiatives across Canada. Because obviously we have multiple police jurisdictions, we got CSIS, we got different organizations. Does the member aware of anywhere in the legislation that requirement is identified in the legislation? Yes or no?
Honourable member for Kamloops Thompson Nicola.
To the best of my knowledge, we have a review period that is required after 3 years. That's part 3 of the legislation, and I think that I'd have to go back and look through this very lengthy bill to see whether there is something like that. Perhaps that is something that could be addressed through amendments. I look forward to hearing my colleagues speak on this bill as well.
Interesting times. Interesting